Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to a test run video. It's based on breaking news from today. We're going to be going over some of the new spellman paths that might be coming to test run. Just to give some context on this, right? If you did test run last week and you did it on any wizard, you probably learned a 7-pip shadow spell. Now, something that's interesting about all of these 7-pip shadow spells is that they follow a spellman path. And what all of them were doing before is that they had two pathways, right? One, if you went down one pathway, you would increase the damage but keep the utility the same. And the other one, you could basically keep the damage the same but increase the utility. Today, what we got some input from the devs on anyways, is that they're considering something completely different. They're thinking of making this shadow spell completely different in terms of pip cost, depending on what direction you go and how far in the direction you go. So today, I'm going to be going over all of them. I'm going to be reviewing them. I'm going to be talking about how they might affect different schools in PvP. I'm going to be giving input from a PvP perspective. So without further ado, let's get right into all of these new 3 to 7 pip shadow spells. Let's start with the ice spell. So basically, the base of it is what they're proposing. It should be a 5 pip spell. So let's not forget, ice already has abominable, so there really doesn't seem to be a reason for you to keep that spell as 5 pips, right? Now here's the thing, even if they rework taunt as they have suggested to the way basically they're saying that if you taunt someone that they have to hit you, the only reason that would be actually like good is if your minion is doing something good on that turn. So let's say that this makes Ice Wizards minion more. Let's say that Ice does minion a lot more. Then you're looking at something where they're going to be using a 3-pip spell a lot. And with pip conserve, what that means is that they're going to have an extra pip left over a lot. So automatically, the 3 best versions of this are going to be either the 7-pip, the 5-pip, or the 3-pip. I honestly think that the best version of this is actually either the 3 or the 5-pip. You're going to always be using pips on a minion anyways. If you're going to be using this for the utility of protecting your minion, you're going to want to save some pips somewhat. So this could be really interesting. We could see someone minioning with literally just 2 power pips, pip conserving, and then protecting their minion if it's doing something good, like, I don't know, blading or trapping or something, and creating a lot of pressure using a 3-pip shadow spell. So already you see the possibilities of the spellman path where you start reducing pip cost. Now, speaking of the whole taunt and pacify idea, right, the life spell also has that utility. So here is the life spellman path that they put on Twitter. Bop! Now, I assume it might be a typo, that it still pacifies for 3 rounds, even though the damage goes all the way down on the 3-pip version. But even if it weren't, you have to look at what life is, right? Life desperately needs damage options. Life doesn't have that many damage options. If you look at a spell like Hungry Caterpillar with its 790 damage to 910, and you look at the 7-pip version of this life spell, you're looking at an insane buff. You're looking at something insane. For 2 extra pips, you basically make it so that you pacify yourself. If you have a minion out, that means that they cannot hit you with the powerful spell. Once again, the concept of pip conserve is almost always gonna make the odd pip spell a little bit better, but in this case specifically, just because of the need for more damage and the fact that it essentially protects you for a round, you're gonna want to do the 7-pip version as a life. I'm probably gonna try to get the 7-pip version if at all possible, but when you're looking at the idea of what life needs and what it is, even if that pacify for the 3 pips is actually 3 rounds, which I still think is a typo, I think the 7-pip version is most certainly going to add a lot to PvP. Now let's look at the fire one. Basically what the fire one does is that it basically does a bunch of damage, and then it adds a fuel of sorts to an overtime. I believe, again, we will test these things out in another video, as I said earlier, but I believe that the overtime symbol on there is essentially that it actually just adds it for maybe either 3 turns, or it adds it if there's an overtime. I assume it just adds it for a limited amount of time. Now here's the thing, when you consider how powerful FFA is already, you're looking at something where, if you really get a 7-pip version of this that does a little bit more, even if it adds some extra traps here and there, it's not necessarily better than FFA, because the FFA trap is still better. And I actually don't think it's a coincidence that the 5-pip version of this spell is literally the same damage as FFA. So you're definitely not going to want the 5-pip because you already have FFA. I think that the best version of this is to either go all the way up to 7 or go down all the way to 3. The reason I say that is because you don't actually have any high pip shad spells that do a lot as a fire. Raging Bull is just not good for PvP. And if you are to hit the high end with that 1350, you're looking at a very, very powerful hit. I definitely think that you want to be able to combo with FFA if you have 2 Shadow Pips, because if you have a hit and a buff, you're always going to want to do that into another hit and buff if you can avoid it, right? So maybe the best version of this is the 4-pip version. I would say any of these work depending on your playstyle other than the 5-pip version. It might be a really good Scorching Scimitar replacement, but out of all of these, I do think that compared to FFA anyways, I think the 7-pip version does the most for what you want, right? I think if you can get that up early, then you have those fuels on, you could totally use it whenever, you know, it's convenient within the time limit of when the traps are. I do think that all versions of the spell except the 5-pip are very viable in PvP if this goes into live realm. Now, the spells currently for Storm is very, very PvE oriented, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but I do think the most obvious comparison that you should make when you're looking at the different pip values of these spell mid pads is most certainly Glowbugs, right? Glowbugs does, for 5 pips and a Shadow Pip, 940 damage to everybody. Now, if you look at the spell rating tiers that are being proposed, it basically goes along those same lines, with the exception being that you might have a weaker Glowbugs for the 5-pip version, but I believe what it's saying is that you get an extra damage for a crit. If you're running, like, a high amount of crit, especially with the new crit and block system, where even if you get blocked, your crit is still gonna matter, then as long as you're running high crit, then the 5-pip version is great. I would say for PvE, especially if you're trying to just speedrun a lot, you start with an odd pip and you gain power pips as you go. So this is another example of why you'd want an odd pip version of this. I would say since you already have bugs, and Tempest is already pretty good for 3 pips anyways, since you could just spam another one right after, clearly you would want to use probably either the 6-pip version or the 7-pip version. You're just going to want an upgraded Glowbugs that just does more damage when you crit. I think since this is an example of a PvE spell, this is just, you know, I would assume that the 7-pip version is preferable, but if you only have the spell unless you get to the 6%, the 6-pip version, it's still like a % buff on your crit. So either one works, I think, for the way this works. So I would say, you know, if this goes into live realm, either of those are great ideas for your PvE storm-oriented gameplay. Now, on the topic of AoEs, Myth also got an AoE, but if you look at the 3-pip version that's in the spell mid path, it actually gets kind of crazy, because what it would do is add another utility to Myth. Now, I'm not here to review whether it's OP or not, that'll be probably tomorrow's video, but because I'll be testing out the confused effect that you see on the screen right now. But given how good Yaga is, given how good Mystic is, this is it's a no-brainer when it comes to PvP. You're gonna want the 3-pip version for PvP. It's honestly not even that powerful for PvE, so I'd still say that the 3-pip version makes a lot of sense. This could be an extremely powerful tool if someone happens to Shrike, right, and you're about to lose. For the sheer cost of just 3 pips and a Shadow Pip, not to mention the fact that you pip conserve, right? You could use that, confuse them, and if they're not careful, they can end up hitting themselves in Shrike. This would be an extremely powerful buff, and I would argue that besides maybe, I don't know, life, if you have a minion out and you're good about that, besides that, this would be the most game-changing spell out of all of these. Now, obviously, this would not be for the damage, and if there are ways to play around the confuse, then it's definitely not going to be that powerful, but for the sake of the powerfulness of the utility, you're gonna want to take that 3-pip AoE. Overall, very interesting spell. The 3-pip version would be an extremely powerful tool, and I would predict that a lot of Myth Wizards would want these 3-pip shadow spells to add to their arsenal in PvP. Let's talk about the depth AoE spell-mid pathways. This is a little crazy. Now, if you guys don't know, the death one, basically what it does, it shifts a negative charm from you to your opponent and then hits. It's really, really good. It's better than Hammer of Thor, basically because the Hammer of Thor just cleanses and then hits. But imagine if someone like minus 90 weaknesses you, or for the sake of like, you know, I don't know, realisticness, I guess, whatever, you know. Let's say someone King Art weaknesses you on their balance, right? You could literally shift over the weakness and hit. And as a blade stacking school, that is extremely important as a utility. Now, let's not forget, though, it is an AoE, so the damage is very, very low no matter what direction you go. But I would say, since Death is a blade stacking school, I would say that the best way to use this spell is most certainly just to, you know, wait until someone weaknesses you and use it at maximum pips. I think that's by far the best way to do it. I didn't know this until recently, but Death just doesn't have any hits that do 1,000 damage base. Even Avenging Fossil, it barely hits 1,000 damage base. And when you're looking at solid hits, it's much worse, right? Like something like Bond is one of the best things you can have, and it hits around 1,000 as a drain for 9 pips, which is a lot different than 7 pips in a Shad. If you enchant the snack attack spell, you're hitting 1,000 damage because you're gonna put in your main deck, you're gonna enchant it with, an epic. You're looking at 1,000 damage that's basically not able to be affected by a weakness unless I guess someone happens to protect it, which is very rare. This is going to be a huge buff no matter what they do with the spellments on this. I think this one's very straightforward. In order to take advantage of it the most, given how Death is in PvP and what they need as a blade stacking school, you're always going to want to take the version that just does the most damage with the ability to shift that weakness. That's 100% going to be the best thing. So in this case, it's very clear cut. The 7-pip version is going to be the best no matter how you look at it. Now finally, let's talk about balance, right? I mean, when you're looking at what's proposed here, which is this, you got to look at the offensive capabilities of balance, right? A lot of the reason why balance can't hit well right now is because Gaze got nerfed so hard, and Worm just isn't really that good of a hit. It only does 768. So when you're looking at a single hit balance spell like Mockenspiel, if you're looking at the 7-pip version, you're already looking at something that does a lot for you. Now, yes, you could theoretically do the 4-pip version, the 3-pip version, and get more, low-pip options. It just doesn't make sense when clearly the part of the toolkit that balance is missing is the 7-pip version. So for the same reasons as Death, for the same reasons even as Life, you're going to want the high-pip version. You have very limited options when it comes to low pips, and it's not like your 5-pip shadow spell is even that good to the point where you'd want a 3-pip shadow spell. But yeah, guys, I think in summary, if they have really good 5-pip spells, like Fire and Ice, you're going to want the lower pip shadow spells. If you don't have good spells in general to begin with for shadow spells, this will give you the option of picking the 7-pip spells. I do think that this type of customizability is really important, especially spellments are very accessible. I do hope that people aren't just spamming 3-pip shadow spells with high shad chance and pip conserve, because that could become very annoying. But I'm hoping that because of the fact that there are spellments and you can't really make TCs of them, maybe that won't be as big of a deal as people think. I don't know. We're gonna have to see when they come out in PvP. As always, y'all, drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a sub if you're new. Let me know what you think of these 3 to 7-pip shadow spells that they just proposed on Twitter. I'm very excited about it. Thank you for all the love. As always, there's tons of links in the description, including my Twitch, my Twitter, my Discord, my Instagram, and of course, my Patreon. And as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong, so stay awesome. And yeah, y'all.